Sherlock Holmes and the Curse of the Egyptian Mummy, from the Reminiscences of John H. Watson, M.D., Chapter 1, Shadows from the Sands. It was one of those mist-shrouded mornings peculiar to the autumns of our great city, when the gas lamps flickered like ghostly sentinels and even the clatter of hooves seemed dampened by the cloying fog. The Baker Street lodgings were unusually silent that morning. I, Dr. John H. Watson, sat with a steaming cup of Darjeeling tea, perusing the Times. My companion, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, stood by the fireplace, his piercing gaze fixed on the embers, his violin untouched in its case. "You have noticed, of course, Watson," Holmes said without turning, "that the article on page 5 reveals far more than the editors comprehend." I glanced down at the folded page in my lap. The headline read, "Renowned archaeologist Sir Edmund Whitlow found dead in Mayfair residence." I skimmed the text again, noting the journalist's florid speculation about ancient Egyptian curses and vengeful pharaohs. "You mean the absurd suggestion of a mummy's curse?" Holmes turned then, his hawk-like features lit by a keen interest. "Precisely. Sir Edmund's death is not simply tragic, it is provocative. He was not merely any archaeologist. He was the principal figure in the Whitlow Carter expedition, which recently unearthed the tomb of Princess Anenka in the Valley of the Kings." I recall the name, yes. The newspapers were filled with it. The find was called the most significant since the tomb of Thutmose. Indeed. And yet, just a week after returning from Egypt, Sir Edmund is discovered lifeless, his face contorted in a rictus of horror, with no sign of forced entry or struggle. Poison? Too early to determine. But the Metropolitan Police have closed the matter as heart failure, which is always their refuge when faced with something they cannot comprehend. Holmes reached for his pipe and filled it methodically. However, Inspector Lestrade has sent word he suspects the matter to be more complicated. We are expected at Whitlow's residence by noon. A carriage took us through the gray, dripping streets to Mayfair. The Whitlow townhouse stood among others of its ilk, grand, somber, and discreetly opulent. A constable nodded as we passed through the door, where we were met by the thin, mustachioed figure of Inspector Lestrade. "Holmes?" "Dr. Watson," Lestrade greeted us curtly. "This way, if you please." We followed him up a staircase lined with Egyptian relics, fragments of painted cartouches, funerary masks, and delicate canopic jars, until we reached Sir Edmund's study. It was a room caught between cultures. Heavy English drapery hung alongside friezes of hieroglyphs. A sarcophagus rested against the far wall, its gilded face staring out with blank, eternal eyes. The air carried a sharp tang of incense. Sir Edmund lay slumped in a high-backed chair. His eyes were open, unseeing. The expression on his face was enough to unsettle the bravest heart, his lips drawn back in what could only be a scream, silenced forever. "We found no wounds, no sign of struggle," Lestrade reported. "But his valet said he had been in perfect health until yesterday evening. Then there's this." He handed Holmes a parchment. It was a letter, hastily scrawled. "The curse is real. We should not have disturbed her. The others will suffer. I hear her voice in the shadows." Holmes read it twice, his face unreadable. Then he paced the room slowly, his eyes flicking over every artifact. He paused before the sarcophagus. "Curious," he murmured. "This is not of Anenki's period." "How can you tell?" I asked. The facial features are stylized in the late Ptolemaic manner, and the coloration is inconsistent with New Kingdom techniques. This piece was not found in the tomb. It was likely purchased elsewhere. Holmes's gaze turned to a small leather-bound journal on the desk. He flipped through it, eyes narrowing. "Here," he said, pointing. "I fear Richard has grown too curious. He asks too many questions about the shipment. I had no choice but to separate the artifacts before Cairo." "Who is Richard?" Lestrade asked. "Dr. Richard Montague, a young Egyptologist who accompanied Sir Edmund on the expedition, a promising scholar by all accounts. We must speak with him and with the rest of the team." A series of interviews followed over the next 2 days. We met Dr. Montague at the British Museum, a man of nervous energy and darting eyes, who clutched his spectacles as if they alone kept his composure intact. Sir Edmund was brilliant, but secretive, he confessed. He insisted on cataloging the finds himself, and there were crates he refused to let any of us open. He said it was for security, but I believe he was hiding something. "Did you believe in the curse?" I asked. Montague shook his head. No, of course not, but I did hear things, at night, in the tomb. Whispering. Perhaps it was the wind, but one night, Whitlow insisted we reseal the inner chamber. He said he'd seen movement in the shadows. Our next visit was to Lady Helena Voss, a patroness of antiquities and one of the expedition's chief financiers. Her drawing room was decorated in Egyptian revival style, and she welcomed us with aloof grace. Sir Edmund was a genius, but an arrogant one, she said coolly. He believed he alone had the right to interpret Anenki's story. He did not share information lightly. Were you aware of any tensions among the team? Oh, yes, especially between him and Mr. Percival Blake, the financier from Alexandria. I believe Blake felt entitled to a greater share of the artifacts. The name of Percival Blake opened another avenue. We learned that he had recently returned from Egypt and was staying at the Savoy. When we called upon him, he greeted us with the smarmy geniality of a man who measures his words by their potential profit. Terrible business about Whitlow, he said, sipping brandy. But he brought it on himself, poking into tombs that should have stayed buried. Did you observe anything unusual on the expedition? Holmes asked. Blake leaned forward, his voice lowered. There were rumors that Edmund smuggled out more than he declared. We had a deal, equal shares, but I saw him sealing crates in Cairo and sending them separately. Wouldn't even let the customs men open them. I think he feared exposure. Back in Baker Street that evening, Holmes pored over the journal again while I examined a map of the dig site, sent to us by the Egyptian Museum. Holmes smoked in contemplative silence. Watson, you will recall the journal entry mentioning separation of the artifacts before Cairo? Yes. And that Montague mentioned sealed crates and Sir Edmund's secretiveness? Certainly. It is beginning to form a picture, one in which the so-called curse serves as both shield and sword. You mean someone is using the myth to mask something more sinister? Holmes smiled thinly. Exactly. The legend provides convenient cover for theft and murder. The question remains, who feared Sir Edmund enough to kill him, and why? At that moment, there came a sharp knock at the door. Mrs. Hudson entered, bearing a telegram. Holmes opened it and read aloud. Montague dead. Found in library. Same look of terror. Come immediately. Lestrade Holmes folded the telegram with chilling calm. The game, Watson, is no longer afoot. It is afoot, ensnared, and laced with the scent of blood. Chapter 2. Echoes in the Library. It was nearing midnight when Holmes and I arrived at Dr. Richard Montague's residence in Bloomsbury. The townhouse stood hunched between others, dark save for the flickering light of lanterns behind drawn curtains. 2 constables loitered outside the wrought iron gate, their breath misting in the bitter November air. Lestrade greeted us in the vestibule, his brow furrowed with the deep lines of someone for whom sleep had become a luxury. It's the same look, Holmes. Same as Whitlow. Rigor hasn't set in yet, but the terror on his face. My God. Montague's library was a small, crowded room, lined floor to ceiling with bookshelves. Egyptian statuettes and papyrus scrolls littered every available surface. In the center of the room, slumped over a mahogany writing desk, lay Montague. His lifeless eyes were frozen wide, mouth open in a silent scream. A half-finished letter lay beneath his hand. Holmes knelt beside the body, brushing his fingers gently along the edge of the parchment. To whom it may concern, if anything should happen to me, know that I did not take my own life. Something is hunting us. The tomb, it should never have been opened. I fear I... He was interrupted, Holmes murmured. Likely by his killer. I leaned closer. There's no sign of a struggle, no blunt force trauma, no blood. What could have killed him? Fear itself, perhaps, Lestrade offered. Holmes snorted. You cannot die of fright unless you believe it, and Montague, though impressionable, was no coward. Look here. He drew my attention to a shattered glass vial in the fireplace. There was a fire recently, I observed, still warm. The remnants of incense, likely Egyptian frankincense or kifi, smell it, sickly sweet. Not unlike the scent in Whitlow's study, but look at the vial's contents. He extracted a small scrap of cloth from the ashes, impregnated with a fine powder. We shall have it analyzed, but I wager it is a rare neurotoxin, something with delayed onset to simulate cardiac failure or fear-induced death. Lestrade frowned. So we're back to poison then? More elaborate than mere arsenic or belladonna. Something far subtler. And something tied to a very specific cultural tableau. Holmes surveyed the room again, his eyes narrowing at the bookshelf. He walked over and traced his fingers along the spines until he stopped at a worn leather volume, Hieratic Incantations of the Late Kingdom. He opened it and removed a folded sheaf of paper tucked inside. "A packing invoice," he said, laying it out on the desk. "Dated 3 weeks ago. See here, 3 crates shipped from Alexandria under Montague's name, all delivered to a warehouse in Wapping Docks." "But Montague said Whitlow was the one hiding the crates," I said. "Indeed, and yet here we have Montague receiving his own consignment, which he failed to mention to us. It appears our scholarly friend was not entirely truthful." "Could he have been complicit?" Lestrade asked. Holmes's lips tightened. "Or perhaps he stumbled too near the truth. Either way, we must inspect that warehouse." The following morning saw us in the fog-choked district of Wapping. The docks, forever steeped in brine and grime, teemed with longshoremen and merchants despite the early hour. We made our way past crates stamped with foreign ports and odorous bales of spice and tea. The warehouse listed on the invoice was an unmarked building with rusted shutters and a heavy oak door. With Lestrade's warrant, we gained entrance. Inside, the gloom hung like a shroud. Holmes's lantern cast sharp shadows against the stacked crates. We located the shipment marked RM 2426 in the rear of the building. Holmes cracked one open with a pry bar. Inside, packed in straw, were small statues, funerary amulets, and a scroll case gilded in gold leaf. "Artifacts of considerable value," I said. "Enough to tempt a thief." "Indeed, Watson? But look here." He extracted a packet wrapped in oilskin and unwrapped it to reveal an obsidian amulet carved in the likeness of Anubis. Holmes's face became grim. This symbol was found repeatedly within the tomb of Ananke, but this amulet was never catalogued. It's not even listed in the museum's manifest. So this was one of the stolen items. Precisely, which means Montague had access to them. Either he helped smuggle them out or he intercepted them from someone else. A soft sound behind us, footsteps on old timber. We turned sharply. A figure in a dark coat stood silhouetted in the doorway, gun drawn. "Gentlemen," said a smooth, cultured voice. "I'm afraid your curiosity ends here." The light shifted enough to reveal his features. "Percival Blake," Holmes said coldly. "A predictable entrance." Blake smiled. "You should have stopped sniffing around when Whitlow died. You were never meant to find this place. And yet here we are." "Indeed. Which means you must vanish. An unfortunate accident in the docks, I imagine." But before he could act, Lestrade stepped from the shadows behind him and pressed the muzzle of his revolver to Blake's temple. "Drop it, Blake. We're not amateurs." The financier's composure shattered as the weapon clattered to the floor. Holmes stepped forward and retrieved it. "You see, Blake, you were correct in believing this would end in an accident. Only it will be yours, in a court of law." Back at Baker Street that evening, Holmes filled his pipe with deliberate satisfaction. Blake was the financier, the smuggler, and ultimately the murderer, but not the mastermind. "What do you mean?" I asked. He lacked the scholarly acumen to orchestrate the entire theft. He was the muscle and the banker. Someone else knew precisely what was worth stealing and how best to hide it. Someone who has not yet shown their hand. Then the murders will not stop? Not until we find the true hand behind the veil. And for that, Watson, we must return to the beginning. Back to Egypt. Chapter The Whispering Tomb. Our journey from London to Egypt was swift by necessity and grim in its purpose. The Eastern and Oriental Express took us across the continent, followed by a steamer from Marseille that sailed under a sky heavy with winter haze. Holmes was uncharacteristically silent for most of the voyage, poring over Montague's notes and archaeological treatises on Princess Ananke's reign. When at last we disembarked in Cairo, the desert sun cast long shadows across the ancient city, which teemed with life even in the cool of winter. We took residence in the Grand Continental Hotel, a grand old establishment frequented by diplomats, scholars, and the occasional adventurer. Holmes wasted no time. "Watson, we must find Dr. Abbas El-Ghani," he said as soon as our bags touched the hotel floor. He oversaw the Egyptian side of the excavation and will have records that were never sent to the British Museum. Dr. Abbas was a slender, hawk-nosed man with sharp eyes and a wary manner. He met us in his office at the Egyptian Museum, surrounded by shelves of ancient ledgers and shelves holding fragments of long-dead dynasties. So, the English finally return, he said, not without irony. To bury your dead or to unearth more curses? Neither, Holmes replied. We seek the truth. Sir Edmund and Dr. Montague are dead. Both were connected to the tomb of Ananke. I suspect the theft of specific artifacts was masked by the legend of a curse. Dr. Abbas's face darkened. The tomb was defiled, Mr. Holmes. Objects were stolen. I protested, but Whitlow dismissed my concerns. He said the sponsors demanded results. He cared more for acclaim than respect for the dead. Can you tell us what was taken? Abbas opened a dusty ledger and gestured us close. Many items were never recorded, but I kept my own inventory. One in particular stands out. A ceremonial dagger of meteoric iron, said to have belonged to the high priest who mummified Ananke. Holmes nodded. And would such a relic have religious significance, or perhaps venomous properties? The blade was said to be cursed, infused with desert cobra venom, and used in rituals of death and rebirth. The toxin could mimic the signs of fear and death, especially if administered by skin contact. Precisely what killed Whitlow and Montague, Holmes murmured. We departed with copies of the original inventory and a growing certainty. Holmes walked in silence through the ancient streets until we stood before the Necropolis Office of Antiquities, where access to the tomb site could be arranged. A bribe and a signature later, we secured a guide and supplies. 2 days later, we arrived at the Valley of the Kings. Our Bedouin guide, Rafik, led us on foot through the sun-bleached canyons until the carved entrance to Ananke's tomb loomed before us, a stone maw yawning open beneath the sand. Few return here, Rafik said grimly. Some say she still whispers at night. Inside, the air grew cool and still. Holmes lit a lantern, casting flickering gold light across the carved walls. Hieroglyphs depicted scenes of judgment, sacrifice, and rebirth. The deeper we went, the more vivid the imagery became. This chamber, Holmes whispered, matches the layout described by Abbas. The sarcophagus should be... He pointed to a depression in the center of the room. The sarcophagus was there, cracked open. The mummy had been disturbed, the wrappings sliced crudely. Grave robbers, or something more deliberate? I asked. Holmes crouched beside the base. He retrieved a shard of pottery and a torn scrap of canvas marked with British customs tags. Blake was here, he said. But he wasn't working alone. This was too systematic. Someone with archaeological training helped him. Suddenly, Holmes froze. He motioned me silent and pointed to the dust near the doorway. Footprints, fresh, and another set, barefoot, smaller. We're not alone, he whispered. A soft rustle came from the passageway, then a voice, a low chant in ancient Egyptian. We turned our lanterns and caught a figure in white linen, face veiled, standing by the wall. The chant ceased. The figure fled into the darkness. We gave chase through winding corridors, stumbling over broken stones and fallen idols. But the figure vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. Back at camp, Holmes was unsettled. It was not a hallucination. Someone is orchestrating these appearances to invoke fear. But why? And who has access to such precise knowledge of these rituals? That night, while the desert wind howled through the canyon, Holmes sat cross-legged with Abbas's notes, sketching diagrams of the tomb and cross-referencing each artifact. It's not about wealth, he said finally. It's about power. Control. The artifacts are a key to something larger, perhaps a map, a codex. Whitlow found it, Montague suspected it, and Blake tried to sell it, but someone else knew the truth. Who? We'll find them, but only if we unearth the last piece. There's one more crate unaccounted for. He held up a coded inventory list with a single item left unchecked. Item 17, Scroll of Ananke's Lament. Contents classified. We must find that scroll, Watson, before someone else does. This Chapter 4, The Scroll of Ananke. Morning broke over the Valley of the Kings with a blaze of scarlet light, casting the tombs in an eerie, sanguine hue. Holmes was already awake when I stirred, seated at the edge of camp, scribbling in his notebook and sipping bitter coffee brewed over the embers of last night's fire. Watson, I have deciphered part of the coded inventory from Dr. Abbas's notes. It appears the missing scroll, the one listed only as Ananke's Lament, was catalogued under a false entry. It was removed days before the tomb's official sealing, under the pretense of medical examination. Medical? What relevance could that have to an ancient scroll? None, Holmes said grimly. but it allowed the thief to move the scroll through customs without scrutiny, and I believe I know where it went. By mid-morning, we were aboard a creaking carriage bound for Luxor, Holmes having arranged an urgent meeting with Colonel Archer Havering, a retired military attaché and patron of the Archaeological Society that had funded the excavation. The colonel, a gruff man with a saber mustache and rheumy eyes, greeted us with wary courtesy at his estate on the banks of the Nile. His drawing room was festooned with relics, scarabs, statuettes, and more than one item that surely did not belong outside a museum. Colonel Havering, Holmes began without preamble, I believe you possess an object of some considerable danger, a scroll removed from the tomb of Princess Anenke. The old soldier bristled. I don't know what you're implying. I've only what was given to me by Sir Edmund. Then perhaps you won't mind us having a look? Grudgingly, Havering led us to a locked cabinet and withdrew a lacquered case. Inside lay a scroll, tightly wound and sealed with black wax. The cartouche of Anenke was stamped upon it in faded gold. He gave it to me for safekeeping, the colonel muttered, said it was cursed and that it would draw danger to anyone who knew its contents. Holmes examined the seal but did not break it. May I? Havering nodded. Holmes carried the scroll to a writing desk, unsealing it with a scalpel. The parchment crackled as it unfurled. Together we leaned over the text. Hieroglyphs, densely packed and inked with a mixture of cinnabar and crushed lapis, covered the scroll. A confession, Holmes murmured, or a prophecy. This appears to be a ritual invocation of the goddess Nephthys, used by the high priest not to bury Anenke, but to imprison her spirit. Imprison it? I echoed. Yes, and more intriguingly, here. This diagram. It's a map, not of a tomb, but of a hidden vault buried beneath the valley, a cache of sacred artifacts sealed away before Anenke's mummification. So Whitlow and Blake were after this vault. That's why they ransacked the tomb. Holmes nodded. And someone else knew about the scroll. That's why it was hidden. Before we could examine further, a crash came from the hall. We rushed out to find the servant sprawled unconscious, the front door ajar. The lacquered case was gone. Blast it! Havering cried. Holmes was already on the move. We followed muddy footprints through the garden and into a narrow alley beyond the estate. They ended at a tethered horse and a trail of scattered sand. Clearly the thief had switched to camel or donkey. Too late, Holmes said, breathless. But this confirms it. Someone within the archaeological circle has gone rogue. They knew the scroll's location and moved swiftly. This was no amateur. Back in Cairo, we regrouped with Dr. Abbas at the museum. I fear we are nearing the endgame, Holmes told him. The scroll has been stolen, but we deciphered enough. The vault beneath the valley, was it ever discovered? Abbas's eyes widened. There were rumors. A second chamber beneath Anenke's sarcophagus, long sealed. None dared disturb it. They feared it was part of the curse. Then that's where the killer will go next. And so must we. The next morning, we returned to the tomb. This time, we brought more than just Rafiq. We had hired laborers and secured permission from the Antiquities Office for excavation. Holmes directed the work with tireless precision. By mid-afternoon, a hidden shaft was uncovered beneath the sarcophagus dais. It descended into darkness. We lowered ourselves by rope. The air was thicker here, moist, cloying with the scent of old rot and sealed centuries. At the base, we discovered a stone door bearing the sigil of Nephthys. Holmes pressed a series of indentations. With a groan, the door slid open. Inside was a chamber filled with gold, ivory, and scrolls stacked in alabaster jars. But at the center stood a stone pedestal. Upon it, nothing. The thief has already been here, Holmes said. The scroll was not their end goal. It was the key. He knelt and examined a trail of wax, identical to that sealing the scroll. They took something far more dangerous than gold, something they intend to use. I looked around, chilled by a sudden irrational dread. Holmes, I said, what could be more dangerous than this? He looked up, eyes grim. Knowledge, Watson, and vengeance. Chapter 5. The Brethren of Anubis. The Cairo sun had not yet risen when we returned from the Valley of the Kings. Though my limbs ached and dust clung to every inch of my person, Holmes refused rest. We made straight for the museum. Dr. Abbas, equally wearied, received us with weary eyes and trembling hands. You've stirred something ancient, Mr. Holmes, he whispered. The air is restless, even though the locals are uneasy. Superstition masks intent, Holmes replied curtly, laying out a copy of the scroll's translation. But we are closing in. I believe the stolen artifact from the vault is an idol, one central to a forgotten rite. Dr. Abbas examined the sketch Holmes had recreated from memory. It was a black figure, the jackal-headed Anubis, but with inscriptions older than the traditional pantheon, symbols of both rebirth and obliteration. This is not a funerary idol, Abbas said slowly. This is a god of thresholds. He was guardian of forbidden gates. The cult of Anubis believed he could reveal secrets of the afterlife to the living, at a price. A price, Holmes echoed. How fitting. We had barely time to absorb the implications before an urgent knock rattled the door. A museum guard stood there breathless. Another body, Dr. Abbas. British, found near the spice market. We hurried through Cairo's labyrinthine alleys to a shaded courtyard where the body of Professor Cedric Bellamy, one of the last members of the Anenke expedition, lay crumpled beside a water fountain. His face was twisted in a rictus of fear, and upon his neck, twin puncture marks oozed a blackened fluid. Venom again, I confirmed after brief examination, similar to Montague and Whitlow. Holmes crouched beside the corpse, withdrawing a small envelope from Bellamy's inner coat pocket. Inside was a torn slip of paper. Coordinates, Holmes muttered, and a name, the Brethren of Anubis. We returned to the museum and pieced the location together, an abandoned Coptic monastery in the Mokattam Hills, once repurposed during Napoleon's campaign and now derelict. By nightfall, we stood before its crumbling arches. Bats flitted from the broken windows. Holmes signaled me to ready my revolver. We may encounter resistance, Watson. These are not merely looters. They are cultists with a purpose. We entered the nave, moonlight casting slats of silver across the floor. A flicker of firelight glowed from the transept. Voices murmured, low and rhythmic. We crept closer. Within the side chapel, robed figures stood in a circle, chanting in ancient Egyptian. At their center, upon an altar, rested the idol. It gleamed obsidian black, its eyes set with rubies. One figure held the scroll and read aloud, voice quivering. Holmes stepped forward. I suggest you cease your invocation, gentlemen. The goddess Nephthys has no tolerance for forgery. Chaos erupted. One cultist hurled a torch at us. Flames licked the rafters. Watson fired a warning shot. Figures scattered. Holmes dashed for the idol while I wrestled with one of the cultists. The leader, a tall man in a scholar's robe, lunged at Holmes with a curved dagger, the ceremonial blade. Holmes ducked, seized the man's arm, and with a swift movement, disarmed him. The blade clattered across the stone. I should have known, Holmes said grimly, pulling back the man's hood. It was Blake. You're too late, Blake hissed. She's waking. You cannot stop it. You used the curse to cover your thefts. You murdered your colleagues to silence them. But you overreached, Blake. This is no longer about profit. It's delusion. Blake snarled, but Holmes struck him cleanly across the jaw. He crumpled. We seized the idol, scroll, and blade. The remaining cultists fled into the darkness. As flames consumed the chapel roof, Holmes stood at the threshold, the idol in hand. We must return these to the tomb, he said. Only there can the dead rest. And Blake? He will answer for his crimes in London, but the true danger is what he almost unleashed. Chapter 6. Return to the Shadow Tomb. The journey back to the valley was undertaken with an urgency that stifled even conversation. Holmes, hunched in the corner of the carriage, kept his gaze fixed on the idol wrapped in linen and cradled in a cedar chest. Blake, shackled and sullen, sat opposite us with a livid bruise forming across his jawline. I watched him carefully, revolver within easy reach. He's unnaturally calm, I whispered to Holmes. Because he believes he's already won, Holmes replied. His fanaticism is rooted in belief, not logic. That makes him more dangerous than ever. Our small caravan arrived at the tomb entrance before dawn. Dr. Abbas awaited us, having prepared the site and dismissed all laborers for secrecy. Only Rafiq remained, and even he kept his distance, eyes flicking warily toward the chest. The tomb of Princess Anenki greeted us like a slumbering beast. Dust stirred as we descended once more into the hidden vault, the darkness swallowing our lantern light. Inside, the chamber had not changed. Gold and ivory still glinted from the alcoves, untouched since our discovery. At the center, the pedestal stood empty. Holmes stepped forward and unwrapped the idol, placing it delicately upon the stone base. A low vibration hummed through the air like the deep breath of some ancient engine stirring back to life. "What now?" I asked. "We wait." Blake chuckled from his bonds. "You think this place will forgive you, but you've disturbed a prison, not a tomb." Before Holmes could respond, the chamber darkened, not from lack of light, but as if the shadows themselves had thickened. The torches flickered wildly. A whispering wind filled the room. The hieroglyphs on the walls shimmered faintly, glowing like phosphorescence. "It's a trick," I said. "Some residue from the tomb's ancient traps." Holmes narrowed his eyes. "No, this is psychological warfare. Blake and his brethren knew of the tomb's resonance, its unique acoustics and mineral composition. They exploited it to reinforce their legend." Blake smiled, triumphant. "Yet here you stand, explaining ghosts to yourself." Suddenly, from a crevice behind the pedestal, a figure emerged. It was a woman, gaunt, cloaked in desert robes, face obscured by a golden funerary mask. She moved with eerie grace. Holmes raised a hand. "Who are you?" She removed the mask. Beneath it was a face not ancient, but modern, pale, stern, and familiar. "Amelia Whitlow," Holmes breathed. "Sister of Richard Whitlow." "He was weak," she said coldly. "He feared the power. I embraced it." "You survived the collapse," I murmured. "I orchestrated it," she replied. "Richard was going to expose Blake. I had to act." Blake's mouth opened in horror. "You? Spare me," she snapped. "You're a thief masquerading as a priest." Holmes stepped forward. Then the curse, the deaths, all engineered by you?" "The deaths were justice," she said. "Those men desecrated a sacred gate. I only ensured the punishment was carried out." Holmes turned to me, his voice low. "She's the final piece, the one orchestrating from the shadows." Amelia drew a pistol from her robes. "None of you are leaving. The gate must remain sealed." I moved to intercept her, but she fired, striking the pedestal. A crack split down its center. The idol tumbled, striking the stone floor. A deep, sonorous hum filled the chamber. Holmes lunged, wrenching the pistol from her hands. I subdued her while Holmes examined the idol. "It's fractured, but not destroyed," he said. "We must seal it away." Dr. Abbas, pale and trembling, stepped forward. "There is a procedure, a rite to enter it properly." "Then begin," Holmes said. We worked for hours under Abbas's guidance, placing the idol back upon the pedestal with ritualistic care, aligning the sigils, sealing the chamber with resin and sacred sand. By sunrise, the tomb was sealed again, not just physically, but ritually, spiritually. Amelia and Blake were taken into custody. Their fates would be decided not in Egypt, but in the courts of London. As we departed, I turned to Holmes. "Do you believe in the curse now?" He smiled faintly. "I believe in the consequences of belief." Chapter 7, The Fog of London. We returned to England under a cloak of storm and silence. The Orient Express bore us westward, its wheels grinding as though resisting the very weight of our memories. Holmes was characteristically withdrawn for much of the journey, speaking only to make sparse observations or to sketch notes in his leather-bound journal. Blake and Amelia, now separated and under constant guard, remained unrepentant. As we arrived at Victoria Station, a thick fog greeted us, London's old ghost, wrapping its fingers around the city's stone heart. Inspector Lestrade awaited on the platform, his coat drawn tight and brow furrowed. "Holmes," he called, tipping his hat. "I trust the Pharaoh's ghosts haven't followed you home." "Only the living ones," Holmes replied, indicating our prisoners. "You'll find them as venomous as any asp." Lestrade's eyes narrowed. "Charges? Murder, theft of antiquities, conspiracy, and attempted ritual sacrifice. An eventful expedition," Lestrade whistled low. "You'll want the yard and a vault separately." Within hours, Blake was delivered to Newgate under high security, while Amelia was remanded to a private facility in Surrey. Holmes insisted on oversight of the idol's transport, delivering it into the British Museum's sub-level antiquities chamber, where Dr. Stanley Barrow, a noted Egyptologist, awaited. "By heavens," Barrow gasped, examining the fractured Anubis idol. "This is older than the pyramid texts. Where did you find it?" "In a place where men ought not to dig," Holmes replied cryptically. "Seal it in lead, double vault it, and speak of it to no one." Barrow's hands trembled as he obeyed. Back at Baker Street, I collapsed into my old chair with a sigh of gratitude. Mrs. Hudson greeted us with brandy and a tray of roast ham. For a moment, the world was sane again, but Holmes did not rest. By candlelight, he pored over the scroll we had recovered. now partially translated, revealing strange invocations and diagrams. "This passage here," he said, tapping the page. "It's a map of ley lines. Look, Watson, they converge under London." I leaned closer. "Surely that's coincidence." "There are no coincidences in architecture or power," he said. Blake believed the idol was a key, but not to the afterlife, to a hidden knowledge buried beneath cities ancient and new. Before I could protest further, a sharp knock rattled the door. Lestrade again, hat in hand and eyes grim. "Holmes. Blake's dead." "Dead? Hung himself, or so the guard says, except there were no ropes in the cell." Holmes stood slowly. "Murder, then, or worse, loose ends tied by other hands." I felt a chill settle over me. "And Amelia?" Lestrade shook his head. "Still in custody, under constant watch, no communication." Holmes turned back to the scroll. "We're not done yet. Someone else is involved. Blake and Amelia were puppets. There's still a hand behind the curtain." I shivered, despite the fire. Outside, the fog pressed harder against the windows. Chapter 8. The Watchers Beneath. 2 days passed. Rain lashed the windows of Baker Street without reprieve. Holmes scarcely moved from his place at the desk, a mound of research growing before him. Scrolls, translations, maps, and books on Mesopotamian and Egyptian cults. The thread he sought was elusive, but I knew he had found its scent. I could see it in the fierce glitter of his eyes. "Have you noticed, Watson," he said at last, "how the symbols on the idol echo those found at Göbekli Tepe, despite being millennia apart?" "I thought we were dealing with Egyptians." "We are," he said. "But Egypt was not the beginning. It was an inheritor. This is older, much older." There was a knock, hesitant, sharp. Mrs. Hudson brought up a card. "A gentleman to see you, Mr. Holmes, from the Foreign Office." Holmes took the card and raised an eyebrow. "Arthur Penrose. Curious. Send him up." Penrose was a tall, austere man, draped in an impeccable gray coat, his face the mask of imperial bureaucracy. "Mr. Holmes, I come not with pleasantries, but with a warning. Your inquiries have touched on sensitive matters." "I rather expected that," Holmes said. "When tombs explode, it tends to rattle more than just dust. You've uncovered more than relics. There are groups, observers, who have long worked to suppress knowledge such as this." "And you are one of them?" Penrose did not answer. Instead, he slid a file across the table. 3 men dead in the last 48 hours. All were at the Whitlow excavation in '89. 2 stabbed, 1 vanished. Their names were redacted from the public record. I suggest you stop here." "I never do," Holmes said, opening the file. "Then, may God protect you," Penrose murmured, vanishing into the mist as suddenly as he had appeared. That night, I awoke to the sound of scraping stone. Holmes was gone. I found him in the cellar, coatless, brushing aside floorboards. "What are you doing?" "Following the map. The ley lines converge beneath us. There is something buried under the city, Watson. Something ancient and not meant to be unearthed." Together we uncovered a trapdoor beneath the flagstones, its hinges long rusted. With effort, we pried it open. A narrow stairway descended into a tunnel carved from black stone, far older than any sewer system. We lit lanterns and descended, our steps echoing. The air was dry and still, unnaturally so. Carvings lined the walls, Egyptian, Sumerian, Babylonian, an impossible blend of cultures and epochs. "This predates Rome," Holmes whispered. The tunnel ended in a vaulted chamber, circular, with a stone disc at its center. The floor was marked with the same symbols from the idol, glowing faintly. As we approached, a figure stepped from the shadows. It was Dr. Barrow. "I warned them," he said quietly. "I told the museum to seal it, but they didn't understand." Holmes's voice was cool. "What is this place?" Barrow looked down. "A vault. A keyhole. The idol was the key, but now it is damaged. I've been watching the ley lines for years, and now they're shifting again. The gate wants to open." "Why would you want that?" Barrow's eyes gleamed. "Not want. Dread. But it will open all the same, unless we complete the sealing ritual. That's why I called you here." Holmes frowned. "You orchestrated this?" "Not all of it," Barrow said. "But I've guided it. You and your friend were always part of the path." I stepped forward. "What ritual? What gate?" "This city was built atop an older one. The gate is beneath it still. If it opens," Holmes interrupted, "then let's make sure it doesn't." Barrow nodded. From his satchel, he removed a second scroll. The ritual would need to be completed soon, before the full moon aligned with the lines of power. Time, it seemed, was running out. Chapter 9. The Key to the Gate. The air in the chamber grew heavier with each passing second, as though the very atmosphere was thickening under the weight of something immense. The walls of black stone seemed to pulse with an energy, ancient and malevolent, and the strange symbols on the floor glowed brighter as we stood at the threshold of the vault. My heart was pounding in my chest, but Holmes's calm demeanor was a stark contrast to my rising apprehension. "What do you mean by the gate?" I asked, trying to steady my breath. "And why didn't you tell us about this sooner, Dr. Barrow?" Barrow hesitated for a moment, his eyes flicking to the stone disc at the center of the chamber. The symbols on the floor seemed to respond, shifting slightly, as if the very space we were standing in was alive. I could feel it, a vibration deep in my bones. "The gate is a threshold," Barrow explained, his voice low and reverent. "It leads to something beyond our understanding, something ancient. If it opens, it will bring forth knowledge unfathomable and dangerous, knowledge that could reshape the world as we know it." "And you want to open it?" I asked, my voice tinged with disbelief. Barrow looked at me, his eyes filled with a strange mixture of fear and excitement. "I don't want to open it, but I fear it will open regardless. The ley lines beneath the city, they are shifting. The idol was the key, and now it is damaged. The ritual must be completed before it's too late." Holmes stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the stone disc. "This keyhole," he said, his voice cool and analytical. "Is it connected to the idol?" Barrow nodded. "Yes, the idol was meant to activate the gate, thus it must be placed here at the center of the disc. But the damage to the idol, it will not work as it was intended." I could feel the urgency in his words, but there was something else there, something hidden behind his veiled concern. I turned to Holmes, who was already studying the symbols on the floor, his sharp eyes narrowing as he took in the glowing runes. "We need to find a way to fix the idol," Holmes said. "Without it, the ritual cannot be completed." Barrow's face twisted with frustration. "It cannot be repaired. The damage is too great." "Is it?" Holmes asked, his voice laced with intrigue. "Let me see it." Barrow hesitated, but eventually handed over the idol, now wrapped in a cloth. Holmes took it carefully, inspecting the cracks that marred its surface. He ran his fingers over the fractures, his mind working rapidly. After a few moments, he looked up at Barrow with a thoughtful expression. "It may be possible," Holmes said, "but we need to act quickly." Barrow's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned to me. "Watson, do you remember the strange incense we encountered in the tomb? The one that seemed to resonate with the walls?" I nodded. "Yes, the scent was overwhelming. It felt almost hypnotic." "Exactly," Holmes said. "The incense was part of a ritual. It created a resonance in the tomb, something that amplified the power of the idol. That resonance is crucial. The idol itself does not hold the power. It merely serves as a conduit. The energy needed to activate the gate comes from the ley lines. We need to recreate that resonance." Barrow looked confused. "You want to create a resonance?" Holmes nodded. "Yes, we will use the same incense, mixed with a special compound I have prepared. If the ley lines are indeed shifting, as you suggest, we will need to amplify that energy. But we must be cautious. This is no simple experiment. If we're wrong, it could trigger the opening of the gate prematurely." I glanced between the two men. The tension in the room was palpable. The fate of the city, and possibly the world, was hanging in the balance. "Where will we get the incense?" I asked. Barrow's lips tightened. "I know where, but it is not easy to obtain." Holmes's gaze did not waver. "Then we must waste no time. Let's go." The tension was thick as we left the chamber and made our way back to the surface. The city of London seemed to pulse with a strange energy, as though it too could sense the ancient forces at work beneath its streets. We made our way through the fog, the streets eerily quiet, and into the heart of the city. Barrow led us to a small, inconspicuous apothecary shop, nestled in a narrow alley. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of herbs and strange compounds. The proprietor, a haggard old man, eyed us with suspicion as we entered. "I need the incense from the tomb of Princess Anenki," Barrow said, his voice low and urgent. The man's eyes flicked to Barrow, then to Holmes, and finally to me. He nodded slowly as though weighing our intentions. "It will cost you," he said, his voice gravely. Barrow didn't hesitate. He reached into his coat and produced a small, velvet pouch filled with gold coins, which he handed to the man. "The incense," he said simply. The man grunted, then disappeared into the back of the shop. We waited in tense silence, the air thick with anticipation. Moments later, the man returned, holding a small jar wrapped in faded cloth. He handed it to Barrow. "Be careful with that," he warned. "It's not something to be trifled with." Barrow took the jar with reverence, cradling it carefully in his hands. As we left the shop, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The fog had grown even denser, the streets growing darker, and the city felt more oppressive than ever before. Back in the cellar, we prepared the incense with meticulous care, following Holmes's instructions to the letter. The air in the chamber seemed to hum as the resonance began to build, the symbols on the floor glowing brighter with each passing moment. I felt the power growing, a strange, almost intoxicating energy that filled the room. My pulse quickened, and I could hear the faint sound of whispers on the air. "It's working," Holmes said, his voice steady. But even as he spoke, I could see the shadows in the room begin to shift. Something was stirring, something ancient and powerful. The gate was awakening. Chapter 10: The Shadow Behind the Gate. The room was alive with an energy that was both electrifying and unsettling. The air hummed, vibrating with an intensity that seemed to reverberate in my very bones. The symbols on the floor were no longer merely glowing. They were pulsing, each beat synchronized with the rapidly increasing thrum in the room. The resonance had reached a crescendo, and for a moment I feared that the walls themselves might collapse under the weight of the ancient forces that were now awake. Holmes stood by the altar, his face impassive as ever. Barrow, on the other hand, was visibly shaken, his eyes wide and filled with something close to awe and fear. He had known of the power that lay in wait beneath the city, but now that it was being awakened, I could see the realization dawning on him. They had crossed a line, and there might be no turning back. I glanced around the room, searching for any sign of danger. The shadows in the far corners seemed to shift unnaturally, flickering like living things, and the temperature had dropped to an almost unbearable chill. Despite the faint glow of the symbols, the space felt darker, as though a thick shroud had descended over the chamber. "Holmes," I said, my voice tight with anxiety, "are we sure this is the right course of action?" He did not look at me, but continued his study of the stone disk. "We have no choice, Watson. The ley lines have been disturbed. The ritual has begun, and we cannot let it proceed unchecked." Barrow stepped forward, his voice trembling. "What if it's too late? What if we can't stop it?" Holmes turned to him, his gaze steely. "We stop it, Barrow. We have no other option." The sound of the pulse intensified, growing louder with each passing moment. My hands clenched into fists, and my throat tightened. The shadows grew darker, their forms becoming more distinct, and I could see something in the distance. A shape, a figure, that was neither fully human nor fully ethereal. I gasped. "Holmes, do you see that?" Holmes's eyes narrowed, his sharp mind already working. "I do. We are no longer alone in this room." The figure in the distance was now unmistakable. A shadowy form, tall and regal, draped in the tattered remnants of what seemed to be an ancient burial shroud. It hovered near the stone disk, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. The air grew colder still as it drew closer, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Barrow took a step back, his face pale. "That's impossible! It can't be real!" Holmes, ever calm, stepped forward, his expression unchanging. "It is real, Barrow, and we are in its domain now." I swallowed hard, my pulse racing. My mind raced with 100 questions, but none of them felt relevant in the face of the figure now standing before us. The shadows seemed to grow denser around it, as if it were pulling the darkness itself into its form. "Who? What are you?" I found my voice at last, the question tumbling out of my mouth. My words felt inadequate in the face of this thing. The figure did not respond with words. Instead, it raised a hand, and with a flick of its fingers, the stone disk beneath us rumbled. A low, guttural sound echoed throughout the room, and the symbols on the floor began to spin wildly, the resonance building to an unbearable pitch. The figure's eyes flared, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw the image of an ancient temple reflected in their depths, a place of death and forgotten gods. I stumbled back, gripping the edge of the altar for support. "Holmes, we need to stop this." Holmes, unfazed, reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small vial of powder. He uncorked it and tossed it onto the floor, where it exploded into a brilliant white light. The figure recoiled, its form flickering as if caught in a storm. The air crackled, and the pulse of the ley lines began to slow, but the figure remained, though now it appeared less solid, more like an apparition. "The power of the ley lines can be tempered, but only if we focus the resonance properly," Holmes said, his voice cool and steady despite the danger surrounding us. "Barrow, we need to complete the ritual, but we must reverse the flow of energy. Otherwise, we risk unleashing the full force of what lies beyond." Barrow was shaking, but he nodded. "What must I do?" Holmes pointed to the idol, still lying on the stone disk. "Place the idol back in its rightful position. It is the key that controls the flow of energy." With trembling hands, Barrow moved toward the idol, but before he could reach it, the shadowy figure stepped in his path, its glowing eyes fixed on him. It raised its hand again, and this time, a blast of cold wind surged forward, knocking Barrow to the ground. I rushed forward, but Holmes held me back with a single firm hand. "No, Watson, we need to maintain focus." The figure turned toward Holmes, its glowing eyes narrowing as if recognizing him. For a moment, I thought we might be done for. But then, with a strange, almost defiant tilt of its head, the figure retreated, dissolving back into the shadows from which it had emerged. I could barely process what had just happened. Had the figure truly retreated? Or was it merely biding its time? I looked at Holmes, who remained unmoved. "What now?" I asked. Holmes's gaze was unwavering as he watched the stone disk. The energy in the room had slowed, but it had not disappeared entirely. There was still something lingering in the air, something ancient and dangerous. "Now we wait," Holmes said quietly. "The ley lines have shifted. The power is no longer building, but we cannot be certain that it is done. We will keep the resonance stable for as long as we can, but we must be prepared for the worst." I glanced around the room, my nerves still on edge, but for the moment, the oppressive weight of the atmosphere seemed to have lifted. The shadows no longer seemed as alive, and the temperature had returned to something more bearable. But I knew that the danger was far from over. The figure, the thing we had encountered, was still out there, and whatever it was, it would not rest until it had accomplished its goal. And I was certain, though I could not yet put it into words, that Holmes knew this as well. Chapter 11. The Price of Knowledge. It had been a full day since our harrowing encounter with the shadowy figure, yet the tension in the air had not fully dissipated. Holmes had not spoken much since the ritual in the underground chamber, and I, too, found myself mired in an uncomfortable silence, the weight of what we had experienced still hanging over me like a dark cloud. Despite the mysterious events, life at Baker Street had resumed its usual rhythm. The daily routine of cases, correspondence, and occasional visits from old friends offered a semblance of normalcy, but the strange energy of the previous night lingered. I could not shake the feeling that we were still being watched, even in the relative safety of our apartment. Something remained out of reach, like a lingering scent or a half-remembered dream. I glanced over at Holmes as he sat by the fireplace, deep in thought. His sharp eyes, normally alert and ever watchful, were now clouded with something I could not place. His mind, as usual, was working through something, seeking answers. But for the first time in our time together, I wondered if even Holmes was struggling to understand the magnitude of what we had uncovered. The idol, now secured in a locked cabinet, still seemed to draw an odd, almost magnetic pull from the room. The air around it was charged, and I could feel its presence even when I was not near it. I knew that Holmes had been spending long hours examining it, sometimes late into the night, seeking to understand the nature of its power and the true meaning of the symbols etched into its surface. It was as though the idol itself was a key to some deeper mystery, and Holmes was unwilling to rest until he unlocked its secrets. It was during one such late-night session that Holmes, deep in thought, suddenly spoke, his voice low and measured. "Watson, have you ever considered the possibility that knowledge itself could be dangerous?" I looked up, startled by the sudden question. "Dangerous?" I echoed. "In what way?" Holmes set the idol down carefully on the table in front of him. His fingers traced the ancient carvings with a sense of reverence, as though he feared that handling it too carelessly would unlock something even darker. "This idol," he said, his voice soft yet intense, "was created by minds that sought to unlock forces far beyond their comprehension. It was not meant for the likes of us, Watson. It was forged to contain a power, an ancient knowledge that, if understood, could unravel the very fabric of reality itself." I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Are you suggesting that the idol is some kind of weapon?" Holmes shook his head, but his expression remained grim. "Not a weapon exactly, but it is a key to understanding the very forces that govern life and death. It is a conduit to an ancient power, one that transcends the mortal realm. It is knowledge that, if obtained, could alter the course of history, or destroy it entirely." I leaned forward, captivated by his words. "But what is this power? What is it that the idol is pointing to?" Holmes's eyes darkened as he met my gaze. "That, Watson, is what we must discover. But we must be careful. Knowledge, as I said, is dangerous. The cost of understanding it may be more than we are willing to pay." Before I could respond, a sudden knock at the door interrupted our conversation. I stood and answered it to find Inspector Lestrade standing in the doorway, his face ashen and his eyes wide with alarm. "Holmes! Watson! You must come quickly. There's been another death." Holmes stood immediately, his expression impassive. "Another? Who?" Lestrade's voice dropped to a whisper. "Barrow. Dr. Waft, Stanley Barrow. He's dead. Found in his study. It looks like he was killed in the same manner as Blake." I felt my stomach tighten. The same manner as Blake? The words reverberated in my mind, and I could not suppress the growing sense of dread that had settled in my chest. We arrived at Barrow's residence within minutes, the ominous fog that had shrouded the city in recent days once again clinging to the streets. The air was thick and oppressive, as though the very atmosphere had absorbed the dark events that had unfolded. As we entered Barrow's study, I saw the lifeless form of the Egyptologist lying on the floor. His face was contorted in agony, his hands frozen in a claw-like position, as though he had died in the midst of a great struggle. Lestrade knelt by the body, carefully inspecting the scene. "It's the same as Blake. No sign of struggle, no weapon, no apparent cause of death. Just like before." Holmes leaned over, his sharp eyes scanning the room. He did not seem surprised, though his mind was already working, piecing together the scattered fragments of the puzzle. He approached the desk and began rifling through the papers on Barrow's cluttered desk. As he sifted through the scattered notes and manuscripts, his eyes narrowed. One piece of parchment caught his attention, and he snatched it up, unfolding it carefully. "Here," he said, holding up the parchment for Lestrade and me to see. It was a page from Barrow's journal, the ink smudged and barely legible, but one phrase stood out clearly. "The idol must be returned before the next death. It is the only way to stop the curse." Lestrade looked up at Holmes, his face pale. "The curse?" he asked, voice trembling. Holmes nodded. "It seems that Barrow knew something. He may have been trying to stop the very events we are witnessing." I felt my heart race. Barrow had written this before his death. Was it a warning or a desperate plea for help? I couldn't tell. Holmes turned to Lestrade. "We need to find out who else knew about this idol, and fast. The answers are somewhere in this city. Someone is behind these deaths, and I believe we are closer than ever to uncovering the truth." As we left Barrow's residence and stepped back into the fog-laden streets, I couldn't shake the sense that we were being pulled deeper into a web of mystery that we may never escape. Chapter 12. The Shadows in the Fog. The fog seemed to grow thicker with each passing hour, as though the city itself were drawing in a breath and holding it in suspense. Holmes and I walked in silence, Lestrade trailing behind us. The streets, usually bustling with life, had taken on a ghostly quality, the dim glow of the gas lamps barely cutting through the mist. "Holmes, do you truly believe that Barrow's warning is genuine?" I asked, my voice hesitant. The chilling thought that we were dealing with something far darker than we had imagined had taken root in my mind. Holmes glanced at me, his expression unreadable. "I do, Watson. I believe that the idol holds power, a power beyond our understanding. But it is not the idol itself that is the danger. It is the knowledge that it represents, the knowledge of forces that were never meant to be uncovered by mortal men. Barrow was close to uncovering something, and I believe he paid for it with his life. I felt a shiver run through me at his words. But who would want to kill Barrow? What was he on the verge of discovering? Holmes didn't answer immediately. His gaze remained fixed ahead, scanning the shadows that loomed on all sides. It was clear that he was thinking, processing information too fast for me to follow. We arrived at the British Museum, where the idol had been placed under tight security. Holmes led us past the rows of antiquities, the air thick with the scent of ancient dust. As we entered the sublevels of the museum, the temperature seemed to drop, the chill of centuries-old relics permeating the stone walls. We arrived at the vault where the idol had been stored. 2 guards stood watch, their eyes wary as Holmes approached. The door creaked open, and we stepped inside. The idol, now sealed in a lead box, sat at the center of the room, untouched, but radiating a strange energy. Holmes stood in front of the idol, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes narrowing as he observed the box. He appeared lost in thought, his mind sifting through the possibilities. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "The idol is not the source of the power," he murmured. "It is the knowledge that it contains. The knowledge of an ancient ritual, a ritual that could unleash untold chaos if performed incorrectly. And I believe that someone is trying to use that knowledge." Lestrade frowned. But how would they even know about this ritual? Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile. There are those who would go to great lengths to uncover secrets of the ancient world. Archaeologists, scholars, even thieves. But knowledge is not easily obtained, Lestrade. It takes a special kind of person, someone willing to take risks, someone like Blake or Amelia. Lestrade's eyes widened. "You don't think they were part of this scheme?" Holmes turned, his gaze piercing. "I believe they were." Amelia was looking for something beyond wealth or fame. The idol may have been a means to an end. But there's someone else, Lestrade. Someone more dangerous. Someone who is using them as pawns in a much larger game. I watched as Holmes moved toward the vault's shelves, scanning the scattered documents and artifacts. He was searching for something, some clue that would reveal the identity of the mastermind behind the deaths. His eyes stopped on a particular scroll, its edges worn and yellowed with age. He lifted it carefully and unrolled it, revealing strange symbols and diagrams. "This," he said, holding it up for us to see, "is a copy of the ritual. It was written by someone who understood the forces at work. This is the key to everything." Lestrade leaned in, squinting at the symbols. "What does it mean?" Holmes studied it intently, his brow furrowing. "It's a map of ley lines beneath London. These lines converge at certain points of power. It is no coincidence that the deaths we've witnessed have occurred near these locations. And I believe that someone is using these ley lines to channel the ritual's energy." I stepped closer, trying to make sense of the markings. "But why London? What is the significance of this city?" Holmes's voice grew quieter, almost reverent. "London sits atop a nexus of power, Watson. It is a city built upon layers of history, ancient and modern. The forces that shape this city are older than anyone could imagine. The ley lines beneath us are conduits, channels of energy that have existed for millennia. Whoever controls them controls the very heart of this city." Lestrade shook his head. "But if someone is trying to use these ley lines to perform this ritual, what's the goal? What are they hoping to achieve?" Holmes's eyes hardened. "Power, Lestrade. Power beyond imagination. The power to change the world, to control life and death itself. That is why they killed Barrow and Blake and others. They were in the way. The ritual requires sacrifices, and they were willing to pay that price." I felt a cold shiver creep up my spine as Holmes's words sank in. The gravity of what we were facing became all too clear. This was no longer just a matter of a few deaths or a stolen artifact. We were dealing with something far greater, an ancient conspiracy that spanned centuries. Holmes turned and gestured to the idol in its lead box. "The idol is the key to unlocking the ritual. Whoever controls it controls the power of the ley lines. And I believe that someone is going to try to complete the ritual soon. Very soon." Lestrade looked from Holmes to the idol, then back again. "What do we do now?" Holmes paused for a moment, his mind working rapidly. "We must stop them, Lestrade. But we cannot do it alone. We need to find the person behind this, the mastermind, and put an end to this madness before it consumes us all. As we left the vault and made our way back into the fog-choked streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but there were still so many questions left unanswered. And the most pressing question of all was, who was behind this plot to harness the power of the ley lines? Chapter 13, Beneath the Surface. The chill of the fog clung to us like an omen as we navigated the twisting streets of London. Holmes's pace was unhurried but deliberate, his every step seemingly calculated, though I had no idea where he was heading. Lestrade was close behind, his heavy boots muffled by the thick mist, and I could hear his breath coming in short, controlled bursts. "Holmes," I ventured, my voice low, "what do you intend to do next? The ritual, what can we do to prevent it?" Holmes did not immediately respond, his mind lost in the complexities of the puzzle. Finally, he turned to me, his sharp eyes piercing through the fog. "We need to understand the ritual completely, Watson," he said. "Only then can we identify the person or group behind it. They are not working in isolation. This is far too intricate for one mind to devise alone." "You believe there are more involved?" Lestrade asked, his tone grim. "Without a doubt," Holmes replied. "This is no ordinary scheme to steal antiquities, Lestrade. This is something far darker, something that seeks to manipulate the very essence of power itself." We continued walking, where the sound of our footsteps drowned out by the oppressive silence of the city. Holmes's mind appeared to be elsewhere, sifting through thoughts and theories faster than I could track. Finally, he spoke again. "We need to locate the ley lines. Their convergence points, Watson. This is the key to understanding where the ritual is to be performed. It's no accident that Barrow, Blake, and the others were killed near these points. Whoever is orchestrating this plot knows these locations intimately." "I had not considered that," I admitted, my mind racing to catch up with Holmes's insights. "So, you believe the deaths are a part of the ritual?" "Yes," Holmes said simply. "Each death is a sacrifice, meant to unlock a piece of the power that lies hidden beneath the city. It is a process of control, of channeling energy into the right places. If they succeed, the ritual will be completed, and the consequences will be catastrophic." Lestrade's expression darkened. "Then we must act quickly, before they can finish what they've started." Holmes nodded, but his gaze was distant. "We will, Lestrade, but first we must gather information. We must learn more about the ley lines and the rituals surrounding them. I suspect there are old records, books, manuscripts, hidden away in private collections. We need to find them before anyone else can." We arrived at the offices of the Royal Society of Antiquaries, a place I had visited only occasionally. Holmes strode into the building with purpose, Lestrade and I following behind. The building was quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes in places filled with ancient knowledge and long-forgotten secrets. The smell of old paper and leather hung in the air, and I could hear the rustling of pages as we passed by row upon row of manuscripts, the ancient texts speaking their own unspoken language. Holmes approached the head archivist, a thin man with spectacles perched precariously on his nose. "Good evening, Mr. Harris," Holmes greeted him briskly. "I am in need of access to your private collection of Egyptian texts, specifically any records that mention ley lines or rituals." The archivist blinked, clearly surprised by the request, but he recovered quickly. "I'm afraid our collection is not open to the public, Mr. Weiss. Holmes, you would need special permission." "I believe we have that," Holmes replied smoothly, sliding a letter from his pocket and handing it to Harris. The letter was from an influential member of the society, one who owed Holmes a considerable debt. The archivist read the letter, his eyes widening slightly. "Very well, Mr. Holmes, follow me." He led us down into a deeper part of the building, where the most valuable records were kept. The shelves here were older, the books more delicate, and the air thicker with the scent of antiquity. Holmes immediately began scanning the rows of texts, pulling books from shelves and flipping through their pages with his usual precision. I followed closely behind, trying to make sense of the symbols and diagrams he was uncovering. It was in one of the volumes, an obscure Egyptian manuscript, that Holmes paused, his fingers tracing a series of symbols. "Here," he murmured. "This is it, the ritual." He pulled the book open, revealing an intricate set of instructions written in ancient hieroglyphs. This is what we've been searching for, Watson. This manuscript details the very ritual that has been performed under London. It speaks of the ley lines, the power of the city, and the sacrifices needed to harness that power. Lestrade stepped forward, his eyes wide with disbelief. What is it exactly that they want to do with all this power? Holmes didn't answer immediately. His expression was one of intense focus as he translated the hieroglyphs aloud, his voice low and measured. The ritual speaks of a ceremony that can amplify the energy of the ley lines beneath London. The person who controls the lines can draw upon their power to influence events on a grand scale, control minds, bend will, even alter the course of history. A cold chill ran through me as I grasped the magnitude of what Holmes was describing. And the sacrifices? What are they for? Holmes's gaze hardened. Each death is a way to strengthen the ley lines. Each life given serves as a conduit for the energy required to complete the ritual. They are binding the city's power to their will, piece by piece. Lestrade looked ill. And who could be behind such a thing? Holmes closed the book with a decisive snap. Someone with a deep understanding of the city's ancient history. Someone who knows the ley lines intimately. But the true question is not who they are, Lestrade. It is why. Why would anyone want such power? We fell into an uneasy silence, the weight of the mystery hanging over us like a thick cloud. We must act, Holmes said at last, his voice filled with determination. The ritual is close to completion. We must find the location of the final convergence, stop the ritual, and confront the mastermind before it's too late. And so we left the Royal Society, the fog thicker than ever, as we raced against time to prevent a catastrophe that threatened to change the course of history. Chapter 14. The Final Convergence. The fog had thickened even further by the time we returned to Baker Street. Holmes was as focused as ever, but the weight of the task before us seemed to hang heavily on his shoulders. I watched him closely, the quick, precise movements of his mind now seemingly at a fever pitch. Lestrade had remained silent for most of the journey, his eyes constantly scanning the streets, as though expecting an ambush at any moment. The gravity of our mission had begun to settle over him as well. "Holmes," I said after a moment, my voice breaking the silence, "where are we going next? The ritual is nearing its completion. We need to stop them, whoever they are, before it's too late." Holmes did not immediately respond, but I could see his eyes scanning the streets as if he were searching for something, a piece of the puzzle that had yet to be discovered. He finally spoke, his voice low and thoughtful. "We need to find the final convergence point, Watson," he said, his gaze steady. "The ley lines beneath London are the key. The ritual will be completed at the point where the energy is strongest, where the ley lines meet. We must pinpoint this location before our enemies do." "And how will we find it?" Lestrade asked, his voice tinged with skepticism. "There must be thousands of ley lines beneath the city. How can we know which one they're using?" Holmes turned to face him, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "The answer lies in the map we discovered. The ley lines that cross beneath London are not all equal. Some points have been identified in ancient texts as places of power, places where the lines converge more strongly. I believe the final convergence is near one of these sites." "And where would that be?" I asked, intrigued by the idea of a hidden, forgotten nexus of power beneath the city. Holmes's eyes gleamed with intensity. "We are not looking for an obvious landmark, Watson. We are looking for something hidden, something that has been deliberately obscured. I believe we will find the final convergence beneath a site that has long been associated with secrecy and power, the ancient priory beneath St. Paul's Cathedral." Lestrade raised an eyebrow. "St. Paul's? But that's one of the most famous landmarks in London. It's hardly a secret." Holmes nodded. "Indeed, but the priory beneath St. Paul's is not well known. It has been concealed for centuries, and those who knew of it rarely spoke of it. It is here that I believe the final convergence lies. The energy of the ley lines will center at that point, and the ritual will reach its climax." I felt a sense of unease settle over me. "But why there? What makes it so special?" Holmes's lips tightened as he considered the question. St. Paul's Cathedral is a symbol of power and influence. It sits atop a site that has been sacred for centuries, built upon the foundations of older structures. Its placement on a ley line is no accident. Whoever is behind this plot understands the significance of such sites. It is the perfect place to complete the ritual. We set off immediately, Holmes's mind working at full speed as he mentally mapped our course. The streets of London were eerily quiet, and the thick fog only added to the sense of dread that seemed to hang in the air. As we neared the cathedral, the fog seemed to cling to the air, making everything appear ghostly and surreal. The towering structure of St. Paul's loomed before us, its stone facade glowing faintly in the dim light of the gas lamps. Holmes led us toward a discreet entrance, hidden away from the general public. The air was thick with the weight of history as we descended into the forgotten depths of the city. We moved swiftly through the labyrinthine corridors beneath the cathedral, our footsteps echoing in the silence. The further we went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The walls seemed to close in around us, and the chill in the air grew more pronounced. It was as though we were entering a place that had not seen the light of day for centuries. At last, we reached a small chamber, its walls lined with ancient stone carvings and cryptic symbols. In the center of the room stood an altar, covered in dust and cobwebs. A faint glow emanated from the cracks in the stone, as though the very earth beneath us were alive with energy. Holmes stepped forward, his eyes scanning the room with intense focus. "This is it," he murmured. "The final convergence point." Lestrade frowned, his voice low. "But where are they? Where's the ritual taking place?" Holmes's gaze fell to the altar, his face hardening. "They are here, Lestrade. We've arrived just in time. The ritual is about to be completed." As if on cue, a sound echoed through the chamber, a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the very walls. The air grew thick with a palpable tension, as though the power of the ley lines was being drawn into the room, feeding the ritual. I could hear footsteps approaching, and Holmes motioned for us to be silent. We crouched behind a pillar, waiting. The footsteps grew louder, and soon 2 figures emerged from the shadows, Amelia Blake and a man I had never seen before. He was tall, with dark eyes and a calculating expression. His movements were precise, deliberate. Amelia stepped forward, her eyes wide with anticipation. "It is time," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The ritual will be complete, and we will have the power to control everything." Holmes's voice rang out from the shadows, sharp and commanding. "Not today, Miss Blake." Amelia's eyes snapped toward us, her expression one of shock and fear. "Holmes," she gasped. "You should not have come. You've ruined everything." The man beside her stepped forward, his hand reaching for the idol that lay upon the altar. "It's too late. The ritual cannot be stopped." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "I think you underestimate the power of knowledge, my friend. The ley lines can only be controlled by those who understand them. And you, it seems, have made a critical error." Before the man could react, Holmes stepped forward, his hand gripping a small vial of liquid he had taken from his coat pocket. He flung it toward the altar with a quick, precise motion. The liquid hit the stone with a hiss, and a blinding light erupted from the altar. The hum of the ley lines intensified, and for a moment the air seemed to crackle with electricity. Amelia screamed, stumbling back. "No, you don't understand. This power is ours." The man lunged toward Holmes, but in that instant, the room seemed to collapse around us. The walls trembled, and the ground beneath our feet began to shake. The ritual was unraveling, its energy spiraling out of control. Holmes's voice was calm, even as the room shook violently. "The ritual can't be completed without the proper knowledge. You've failed." The man looked at Holmes with a mix of fury and disbelief. "You think you've won? You've only delayed the inevitable." Holmes didn't answer. Instead, he turned to Lestrade. "Get them out of here, Lestrade. The ritual's over." Lestrade moved swiftly, seizing both Amelia and the man and pulling them away from the altar. Holmes turned toward me, his expression unreadable. "We've stopped it, Watson," he said quietly, "but the game is far from over." Chapter 15. The Mastermind Unveiled. The chamber beneath St. Paul's Cathedral grew eerily quiet as the final remnants of the ritual dissolved into the shadows. The energy that had surged through the ley lines receded as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind only the cold, lingering weight of the moment. The hum in the air faded, and the trembling of the walls subsided, as though the very foundation of the city had exhaled a collective sigh of relief. Lestrade hauled Amelia Blake and her accomplice to their feet, his grip firm as he pulled them toward the exit. The look in Amelia's eyes was a mixture of shock and rage, as though she couldn't comprehend the loss of control. Her plans had unraveled, and she was left with nothing but the bitter taste of failure. Holmes stood at the altar, his face impassive, as though he had already moved past the immediate danger and into the next phase of the investigation. I approached him cautiously, sensing the weight of his thoughts. "Holmes," I said softly, "it's over. We've stopped them." "Have we?" Holmes replied, his voice low and measured. "The ritual may be over, Watson, but the forces behind it remain. The true mastermind is still at large." I frowned. "You mean there's someone else? Someone more powerful than Blake and the man she was with?" Holmes nodded. "Precisely. Blake was a pawn in a much larger game. She believed she was controlling the power of the ley lines, but she was simply a tool for someone more clever, someone who had orchestrated everything from the shadows." Lestrade returned to the chamber, his hands clasped tightly behind his back as he processed the enormity of the situation. "Who could be behind all this, Holmes? How do we even begin to track them down?" Holmes turned toward the altar once more, his eyes scanning the now dormant idol of Anubis. "I suspect the answer lies within the artifact itself. The idol was not just a key, it was a symbol, a signal. Its purpose was not only to harness power, but to send a message." I looked at the idol, its fractured form now eerily still. "A message?" Holmes's lips twitched ever so slightly, a glimmer of something akin to satisfaction in his eyes. "Yes, a message meant for someone who would understand its significance, someone with enough knowledge of Egyptology, ley lines, and ancient rituals to manipulate the power beneath London." Lestrade's brows furrowed. "Who could that be?" Holmes smiled, the sharpness of his intellect cutting through the confusion. "Someone we've overlooked, Lestrade. Someone who has been under our noses this entire time. Dr. Stanley Barrow." I gasped. "Barrow? The Egyptologist? He's been working with us all along." "Precisely," Holmes said, his voice cold. "Dr. Barrow is not merely an innocent academic. He has been playing us all from the beginning. His knowledge of ancient Egyptian rituals, his access to the most sacred texts, he's been the one pulling the strings from the very start." "But why?" I asked, bewildered. "Why go to such lengths to manipulate us? To set this entire scheme in motion?" Holmes's eyes narrowed as he considered the question. "Because Dr. Barrow is not merely seeking knowledge, Watson. He is seeking power. Power that would allow him to control not just the ley lines beneath London, but the flow of history itself." Lestrade shook his head in disbelief. "But he's a respected scholar. He's held in high regard in the scientific community. Why would anyone suspect him?" "That is precisely the point," Holmes said, his voice laced with disdain. "Dr. Barrow has been using his position to cover his tracks. His reputation as an esteemed Egyptologist has shielded him from suspicion. But the truth is that he has been playing a dangerous game, a game with far-reaching consequences." I looked toward the altar once more, my mind reeling. "But how can we stop him? He's already caused so much damage." Holmes's gaze turned toward the exit, where Lestrade was still standing, holding Amelia and her accomplice in tow. "We will expose him, Watson. The ritual may have been interrupted, but the truth cannot be hidden forever. We will bring Barrow to justice for his part in this conspiracy, before he can find another way to complete his dark work." Lestrade nodded grimly, understanding the weight of Holmes's words. "We'll need more evidence. How can we prove he was behind all this?" Holmes's lips curled into a thin smile. "Evidence, Lestrade, is what I do best." Several hours later, we found ourselves in Dr. Barrow's office, a small, book-lined study tucked away in a quiet corner of London. The room was cluttered with ancient texts, maps, and artifacts, all of them meticulously arranged. But it was the desk that drew our attention. Specifically, the large drawer that Holmes had opened with a swift motion. "Here," he said quietly, pulling out a leather-bound journal. "This is where Barrow has kept his true thoughts." I glanced at the journal. The pages yellowed with age. Holmes flipped it open and began reading aloud. "I have learned much, but the ritual cannot be completed without the final piece. The ley lines beneath London are close to their full potential. I must act swiftly before others discover my work." Holmes paused, his eyes narrowing. "This confirms it, Watson. Barrow has been planning this for years, and now he's preparing for his final move. Just as Holmes was about to continue, a sound echoed from behind us, the unmistakable creak of a door opening. We spun around, and there, standing in the doorway, was Dr. Stanley Barrow himself. His face was pale, his eyes cold and calculating. "So," he said softly, "you've discovered my secret." Holmes stood tall, his voice steady and firm. "Your secret, Dr. Barrow, will not save you. The ritual is over, and your power has been broken. It is time for you to face the consequences of your actions." Barrow smiled, though it was a smile devoid of warmth. "You believe you've won, Sherlock Holmes? But the game is far from over. The ley lines are still there. The power I've unlocked cannot be undone." Holmes's eyes gleamed with a quiet confidence. "Perhaps, Barrow, but this game has already reached its end, and you are the one who will pay for your crimes." With that, the authorities were called, and Dr. Barrow was taken into custody. His intricate web of deception, manipulation, and dark rituals had finally unraveled. He would never again threaten the delicate balance of power that he had sought to control. The fog that had once enveloped London seemed to lift, if only slightly, as we stood on the steps of the Royal Society. The city felt, for the first time in weeks, as though it could breathe again. Holmes turned to me, his face still as inscrutable as ever. "It is finished, Watson. The curse has been lifted. London is safe, for now." I smiled, though the weight of the journey still hung heavy on my heart. "Another victory, Holmes. But I suspect that no matter how many cases we solve, there will always be another waiting for us." Holmes chuckled softly, his eyes gleaming with that familiar spark. "Indeed, Watson, the game never truly ends." And so, with the shadows of the Egyptian curse now behind us, we returned to our work, ready to face whatever mysteries the future would bring. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed the story. Don't forget to leave a comment letting us know which story you'd like to hear next and where you're tuning in from. We love hearing from our detective fans around the world. See you in the next adventure.